Good day, everybody, for wherever you are right now. Good morning, good evening, uh, and good day. Today's enterprises are under pressure to keep pace with digital transformation initiatives to fend off the increasing number of business vying for market share. All that has multiplied exponentially in the past 7 to 8 months with the risks of the pandemic and the changing work environments of various organizations. From big data to IoT to serverless organizations are increasingly turning to application modernization to outpace and out innovate competitors. Still, most organizations are forced to spend far too much time with keeping the lights on to support legacy applications and outdated infrastructures rather than being able to focus on strategic initiatives. The silver lining is that the CIOs and the CISOs have a part to future successes. And the part starts with categorizing as to what's important, what's not, and keeping in pace with the changing needs of the business and the ever evolving threat landscape. My name is Farooq Naiyer. I am the CISO at Orion, which is a not for profit research and education network for the province of Ontario in Canada. But I'm fortunate enough that I have an esteemed panel who represent the security leadership of the continent of Africa. The topic for today is a pretty interesting one, which is about top CISO challenges and security matrix beyond the COVID-19 era, insider threats, budgets, KPIs, and KRIs. So we're going to be touching on some really important aspects in terms of how the future looks like and what it holds for us. I will start off with introducing our esteemed panel, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So I'll start off with Osama to introduce himself and tell us about himself.
Hello, everyone. Good day for you all. And I've just introduced myself like 30 minutes ago. I'm again the same person, Osama Hijji, or Hijji, as we pronounce it in Arabic. I'm the technical director for IP protocol, a system integrator in Egypt, and as well the chief information security officer of GEA Group. I'm as well a cyber evangelist, promoting all the time the importance of cybersecurity for the community of IT in Egypt, here in Africa as well.
Thank you, Osama. So glad to hear from you, and yeah, really excited to hear your expert opinion. The next panelist is Gilbert.
Thanks, Farooq. My name is Gilbert. Indeed, I'm the CEO of Africa Cyber Defense Forum. Equally as well, I'm the CEO of Innovice, which is a cybersecurity consultancy firm with operations spread across Africa. So, we're into normal assessment, penetration testing, digital forensics, IR, and, the entire end-to-end cybersecurity solutions and services. Back to you in the studio. You're muted, Farooq.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Gilbert. Yeah, so we'll start off with the conversation. And I think let's start off by just talking about in terms of what does an effective strategy look like for the future. So Osama, like to hear your opinion on that.
That's actually where we build on the previous presentation we just shared with our audience. I believe nowadays you cannot have an effective cybersecurity strategy that doesn't take deterrence into consideration. And that's one of the things that I find really missing in many cyber strategies we see nowadays. The point here is if you see the statistics of any year, I mean, in 2020, the attacks, the cyber attacks were more than 2019. You don't need to search it, you don't need to Google it. Every CISO in the industry knows it. The attacks are increasing year by year. The COVID-19, I thought at least some of the hackers would get COVID-19. No, it's actually the attacks increased because of COVID-19. We are seeing all the time a surge in the attacks. In my humble opinion, the main reason behind this is that we are all the time not focused on the attackers. they are still there on the loose, doing whatever they want to do, unpunished. And the fact that we are not really, whether on state or enterprise level, on both of them, not targeting them means year after year the attacks will keep increasing. CIOs, CISOs, and CEOs will be always crumbling under the load of incidents that keeps increasing all the time, and this vicious circle will never end. So we need to start considering putting some deterrence controls in our cyber strategy. Things like, I mean, let's just talk. I'm not going to talk state. That's probably enterprise is going to be more interesting. But I mean, let's have at least some deceptive controls within our security preparation, within our security controls, at least to send the message out there to the attackers that they are not safe. They might be disclosing their own techniques, they might be disclosing their tools they are using, they might be even divulging their own identity while performing an attack that is not going to serve them in any way because it's an attack on a fake target. If you send this message out there to the attackers, if you made them think twice about performing an attack, probably you will start seeing a decrease in the number of attacks. This is really what we target. This is really what we want in cybersecurity. We want to see the attacks decreasing. I mean, when it's very disappointing that every year you read the reports, the attacks are increasing. Okay, it's a kind of a raison d'etre for the people in security. So there is a reason for companies to hire us and to give us good salaries. Nonetheless, the problem keeps getting bigger and it's not really getting sorted out. And I think an effective cybersecurity strategy has to include cyber deterrence controls. That's the way for the future. And I leave the ground for Gilbert if you would like to add something to this.
No, thanks, Osama. I mean, it's an interesting perspective that you've brought in the angle of cyber deterrence. And, you know, I love the presentation that you made earlier, that cyber deterrence and cybersecurity are two different things. And the fact that you're saying even in terms of investment, you will need more investment in cyber deterrence. But I fully agree with you that maybe we need to see more and more, it is talking about the honeypot, I'm sure the honeypot infrastructure, the honeypot project, where we should be able, and I think all that goes into the threat intel side of the cyber strategy, as Farooq is saying, so that our cyber security strategy should also include the angle of threat intelligence. And in this case, of course, Osama is bringing the angle of let's include the cyber deterrence to be able to also get in more threat intelligence to feed into, knowing, for example, where some of these attacks are coming from, where these sources are coming from. And I think maybe that now brings a conversation, maybe in the entire strategy, maybe because of the investment that might be needed in cyber deterrence, maybe the states should now be able to collaborate with the private sector to be able to maybe offer, and I believe there are different SARTs and computer incident response teams and SARTs that maybe I believe will be the best to also be able to add more value to the industry by offering more and more intelligence and sharing intelligence feeds through the different cyber deterrence strategy with the corporate as well, so that we're able to see where the targets coming from, what are they targeting, and what are, for example, maybe some of the digital jewels they're looking for.
Yes, I fully agree with your take, Gilbert, as this. We need as well to focus definitely on threat intelligence. One thing as well I need to mention clearly, we need, as you said, the cooperation. That's really important, especially among states together. Some African states actually has some of the best hackers on the planet. And they constitute really a threat on not just on Africa, on everyone in planet Earth. And I think the states as well need to cooperate together. I mean, no offense to my Nigerian colleagues here, but we all know that there was this hackers gang in Nigeria that was arrested for a very famous email scam, And I think really we need to cooperate with the authorities in Nigeria, everyone. I mean, if those hackers realize that the Kenyan or the Egyptian government is in cooperation with the Nigerian government, maybe they will not consider attacking targets in Egypt and Kenya. That's what I'm trying to say. And we all have this kind of crimes in our country. It's not just Nigeria. So yes, I really agree with you, Gilbert, on the point of cooperation between the private sector and the states and the African states together, and probably on talking cyber strategy on the level of Africa. Maybe the African Union needs to put as well a mechanism for that, for African countries to cooperate together in cybersecurity.
Okay. So Osama and Gilbert, I like to quote something from one of my favorite books, which is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And in that book, there's a really important section which talks about the fact that in order to know your enemy, look out for signs of the enemy's behavior, interpret them to understand the enemy's weaknesses, and react accordingly. Like signs of exhaustion, thirst, or hunger. If the negotiator is irritable, it means they are exhausted. And the quote in that book says that know yourself, know thy enemy, and thousand wars would be won. So in short, what that book says is that in order to defeat your enemy, you need to know how they behave. And I think what I heard you and Osama, you and Gilbert saying is that organizations need to be more proactive in terms of responding to these threats. You spoke about deceptive controls. You spoke about more active threat sharing or sharing of threat intelligence. It means you're talking about certs or organizational certs or the certs representing countries to have more active cooperation. And when we talk about threat intelligence itself, I mean, threat intelligence has many shapes and forms, from strategic threat intelligence all the way up to tactical and operational threat intelligence, which is a combination of TTPs and all those things. But coming back to where these threats are coming from, I would like to pick your brains on the fact that, okay, what kind of state actor and non-state actor activities are we looking in Africa, and particularly in particular, because I mean the different parts of the world are experiencing different kind of attacks from various state actors. So could you just shed some lights on what kind of state actors you're dealing with, what kind of behaviors you're seeing on the state actors and non-state actors front, and what is being done to counter all that? So Osama, what's your take on?
From my perspective, I mean, I live in Egypt, and we are seeing both kind of threats happening here as we speak. The state-sponsored attacks and the usual basically right now, financially motivated attacks happening in the entire region of North Africa. And I think it would be safe to say that because of belonging to different political circles, North African countries probably are seeing a bit of a different threat landscape than the one in Central and Southern African countries. Egypt, just as an example in this, Egypt is part of an ongoing cyber war. It's a political thing, but I guess it's known to everyone. Egypt is allying itself with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, and consequently, it's in the range of fire of the opponent of these countries, which is basically Iran, and as well some of the other key players in the region. So we are seeing in Egypt in particular a huge jump in state-sponsored attacks, not just from Iran, by the way, but as well from other countries in the regions like Qatar and Turkey. On the other hand, the attacks that are the usual attacks, I would say, that the non-state-sponsored attacks, they are increasing. I guess they are increasing as well, but they are increasing at the normal rate. There isn't really any unexpected spikes. So they increase it by, let's say, 10% in the world, 20% or 100% in the world. They increase it by the same rate in Egypt. But what we see differently here in Egypt, and countries, by the way, like Libya as well, are in the same. It's another North African country. They are in the same situation with Egypt. The state-sponsored attacks increased very much beyond the normal rates around the place. So the threat landscape for us in Egypt, at least I would say the North African countries, is really changing. We are witnessing a surge that is not the same compared to the rest of the world in state-sponsored attacks. And there are actually some specific industries that are coming under attack. In Egypt, for example, one of the industries that is becoming increasingly under attack is the oil and gas. Typically, when state-sponsored attacks used to be at its norms, banking was actually the preferred target of the attacks. It makes perfect sense.
Okay, can you guys hear Osama?
I think it's frozen. Maybe we've lost it.
Okay, so while his screen is frozen, Gilbert, you can probably weigh in while we wait for him, and then we can join us back.
Sure. No. Okay. So I think it's the same. Just to pick up from where Osama was developing. Osama, are you there? Should we? Okay. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead, and we'll patch him in once he's back. Yeah.
Sure. So what I'm saying here is that just developing on what Osama was developing is that you see the threat landscape in Africa is changing, and there's no doubt that it's going to change. But when it comes to the threat, or rather the state-sponsored actor, the problem that we face is issue of attribution. That's number one problem. How do you attribute these attacks to one X or Y country? Now, the number two is, for example, I'm sure you're aware of the latest study. You are aware of the latest study that was done, that was reported, that the African Union was a target of data flow, rather data leakage to the China state, in the sense that there was allegation, because I have to use a politically correct term here, to not so that the whole conversation was that at midnight data was flowing back to China, and this conversation came from the fact that China had built the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, and we are in a world where data is now the new oil, as they say, and there was the fear and the risk that some of these servers that were deployed by the Chinese were actually transferring data to China. And that is a very, very huge threat, if you can imagine such a thing happening to a state, or rather maybe an institution that represents African countries like African Union, where maybe let's say they are in assembly and another state is able to have access to this information. It's quite serious allegation, or like quite a serious information to have. It is quite threatening. But also the angle of, Africa hasn't had, you cannot pinpoint at this point. It doesn't mean it's not happening. You cannot pinpoint that X country is attacking Y. You can see some maybe online social media attacks, maybe online, maybe happening between countries. But targeted country-wise, I think we're going to see an increase of this. Maybe in the Middle East, for example, it's quite all over in the media of what's happening, or other countries. People talk about Russia. And what we have to recognize is that there's no doubt the next domain of war is cyberspace. And if you look at, for example, in Russia, they no longer talk about cyberspace. They talk about information warfare, information space. So Russia now talk about it in the information, not just the cyber. So the truth is that the domain of cyberspace is going to be the next domain of war. In Africa, the threats are continuing, and I think we're going to see more and more of this. In the other side of attacks, of course, we are seeing more attacks happening apart from the financial infrastructure that Osama had clarified that we've seen more attacks. But now we are seeing also healthcare, where some of the attacks are also targeting healthcare, our healthcare infrastructure. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic was one of them, where we were able to see some of these attacks, targeting institutions of, healthcare. And I think you are going to see more and more, apart from only the financial institutions being the major targets. But of course, we are going to see an expansion both in the healthcare and as well, of course, to also maybe now state-sponsored, where maybe states are now going to be able to launch their capabilities and arsenals, to maybe be able to just, achieve their goal, whatever, is it economic or political.
Thank you, Gilbert. And Osama, since you're back, you can probably complete what you were saying about the real estate actors.
Yes, I wanted finally to add a point about the type of attack, not actually the target of the attack that we are seeing in the landscape here in North Africa. The usual advanced persistent threats are, the advanced persistent threat is the usual mechanism used by state-sponsored attacks. Malwares like Emotet are still using the same pattern of attacks, but the thing we have been seeing on the increase in the previous, I would say, 9 to 10 years in Egypt at least, and probably in the North African portion of Africa as well, is disinformation. And this is becoming increasingly a cybersecurity issue. Although it shouldn't be, in my point of view, it's not something that should be regulated by cybersecurity people at all. However, it's becoming right now an issue, and the way, there are mechanisms that are used for cybersecurity there are mechanisms that are used for disinformation that are becoming increasingly a cybersecurity issue. Just to explain this statement, there is now a phenomenon known as trolling over the internet. So what is trolling exactly? Trolling is, I will send a piece of information out there on the internet saying that, I don't know, that the moon is flat. The moon is not a sphere, it is a flat. And then all of a sudden, you will find thousands, probably millions of people sharing this information, because the moon is not flat. We all know that the moon is circular, you can see it. But anyway, you will find all of a sudden millions sharing this piece of information, millions liking it, millions are actually discussing it. And all of these numbers you see are actually fake. These are operations conducted by trolls. Trolls are automated systems that looks like human beings, and they are made there to shape public opinion and to spread this information. Many of the social media platforms are finding this increasingly, for them, from their perspective as social media, they are viewing this as a cybersecurity issue, because basically these accounts are fake accounts. They are not real accounts. In the sense, there are no real humans behind them. If you are a human and you believe that the earth is flat, that's not a problem. You're a human. You have your own account, and that's your belief. We will not consider this part of the trolling attack. However, if there is no one behind this account, it's just one person conducting thousands of accounts, that's what is defined from a cybersecurity perspective as trolling. Trolling attacks are becoming very, very frequent in the northern part of Africa. They are in most of the cases politically motivated. They are not financially motivated. They are in most of the cases politically motivated, and it's a new type of attack we are seeing. Of course, the ultimate objective of this is to shape public opinion. This is done through disinformation, and the trolling is the mechanism itself. And this is becoming increasingly a problem for cybersecurity people, working in I would say the social media platforms and the media in general.
Yeah, good. No, I'm glad that you spoke about trolling because that's a good segue into my next question. So
Yeah,
I'm
thank
glad
you.
that you brought it up. So, and when we talk about things like trolling and disinformation, we're actually talking about adapting to emerging trends. And disinformation is itself a domain in itself in which there are various factors. I mean, you just highlighted one critical factor, which is trolling, in which you've got uh, either dealing with bots, which are not humans, or dealing with humans. And there are lots of things which are associated with disinformation. I mean, there are lots of algorithms and all that. And I think I don't need to go into details, but we all know what happened in terms of Cambridge Analytica. We all witnessed what the US elections was privy to, and that's just tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's lots of other things which we can even talk about, that how disinformation has been used as a propaganda against various governments in any part of the world. And I think you gave some really good examples about Northern Africa. But what I would like to do is that like to get input from the other panelists on adapting to emerging trends. And emerging trends, when we talk about that, disinformation is just one part of that, but cloud backdoors and just the a very fact that organizations are depending more and more on cloud, and then the clouds are becoming so vulnerable. Then we are also talking about 5G and threats related to IoT. So what I would like to do is that I would like to open the floor for everybody to weigh in on that. But before that, I would like to take the opportunity of introducing our panelist, Ahmed Nabil, who has just joined the conversation. Uh, Greetings, Ahmed. I just wanted to get an okay from our production team. Jordan and Mehdi, are we good with Ahmed? Okay, amazing, amazing. So, Ahmed, without further ado, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll ask you to share your opinion on this question. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the chance to speak about this event. So my name is Ahmed Nabil. I'm country regional information security director in one of the large financial institutions. Previously, I was a chief architect in an oil and gas industry and a CISO and CIO in the engineering industry as well. So I've been working in security with main focus in cloud, maybe cloud security for the last maybe 7, 8 years, and overall security and IT more than 15. I'll not mention more than this, so I will not look that older.
Amazing, amazing. So, since you just joined the conversation, we'd like to turn the question to you. So, in terms of adapting to emerging trends, I know when we were having a planning call, you shared some really good insights on the effects of the cloud and the convergence toward the cloud. So, uh, fill us in on what the emerging trends are they in the area of clouds, and what should we expect and what should we do about it, Ahmed?
Yeah, so actually, when we understand that the cloud, of course, has transformed our business, large and small businesses across all sectors in the recent years. And actually, we are expecting this to increase even in the next couple of years. All companies, IDCR, for example, are predicting that by 2023, more public cloud spending will be there. However, there's a lot of challenges when going to the cloud. With all the digital transformation, with all what happened during the COVID and the pandemic and the increased adoption, these challenges are getting clearly. So with the cloud, you're moving a lot of your data, you're moving a lot of your store, your compute, your infrastructure to the cloud. Moving significant amount of data will open clear security risks for you. And then some business sometimes fall in the trap of thinking that once the migration is done, the security risks are overcome, are done. Once we're moving to the cloud will take care of everything, which is not true. So we need to understand about the cloud internal threats. We need to consider things like the third-party threats when dealing with the cloud. We need to think about the AI, the data. What are you going to do with our data? The insider threats about this, the clear pickup of the cloud, because it's kind of a win-win and a long-term partnership with you and your cloud services. So these are kind of threats that we need to think about when moving to the cloud, for example.
Thank you, Nabil. Thanks a lot. I think with that, I'd like to move over to Gilbert. Gilbert, what emerging trends you want to talk about, and in terms of how it impacts the future priorities of the CISOs?
No, thanks Farooq, and thanks Ahmed for the great contribution. Now, I think just to develop from where Ahmed has really, brought the conversation, people are moving into the cloud, and it's very interesting where now we're looking at, okay, yes, we've moved to the cloud. Yes, we see people are adopting maybe the hybrid model where still, of course, not 100% to the cloud. More so, if you look at the banking sector, we are going to see more a progressive approach to moving to the cloud. But again, the issue that Rabil has talked about, for example, there's a very, very important element where do we lie the responsibility to? Whose responsibility is it now? Because as he said, some organizations, they think, okay, we have now moved to the cloud. Now the responsibility maybe is to the third party, whatever the third party cloud provider we are using. But as he has pointed out, it's not the truth, because the data in itself, we still have a shared responsibility. Because I was listening to one podcast which was looking at, imagine if we could have an entire blackout of most of the cloud infrastructures. That's an imagination, but you can see the risk, because us moving to the cloud, and you can imagine where that point of business continuity. Cloud is amazing; it makes our work agile and easy, but of course there's that risk as well. Looking at the business continuity angle, how prepared are we even as we move to the cloud? How prepared are we? Number two, as well, the risk that he has talked about, which I would like to develop, is on the third-party risks. Because most organizations, for sure, have to be able to ensure that that third-party risk is well assessed. Is there a good third-party risk assessment, risk management framework, where, for example, some of this, whether it's suppliers, whatever the different people that the organization interact with, do we have clear policies and procedures that are able to identify some of those risks within those different channels? And the other risk, of course, most I've seen in the financial sector, is the insider fraud, the insider threat. I was listening to this conversation where, can you imagine where now even the attackers have become very smart, for example, where they are able to use, for example, some of the stolen credentials, of an insider or an inside user within an organization. I don't know how easy is it to detect that, to be honest, because if I am an attacker from an attacker perspective and I'm able to use, for example, credentials of an insider, for example, it might be, as a detection mechanism, or rather as the defense side, you will think it's a normal user because these are normal user within your framework. So these are normal user, normal logging. And I think that's where now even you see the attacks coming in, where now the hackers themselves are now realizing that either be it through collaboration from internal insider threat, or be it also from the angle where you have access to the insider information, for example, a user, be it maybe stolen credentials, you can easily be able to use them. Now we're talking about people logging through, different platforms where you're able to access your email from home. Just give the different platforms without mentioning the different vendors, but there are platforms that allow you to be able to access your email from home. So if I have, for example, Ahmed's credential or Osama's credential, I am easily be able to access really his email, and from there I'm able to do a transversal attack and lateral movement from even the email server to maybe lateral movement even to the Active Directory, for example. So you can imagine that level of attack can become so much sophisticated that even some of the products, or rather, because cybersecurity unfortunately is a vendor-driven market, that sometimes I say there's too much noise. Too much noise. Everybody's, solving AI, ML, everybody comes to you as a CISO, there might be a lot of fatigue, but you realize that sometimes is that these threats that are most of the insider threat, and the way the attackers are getting smart, another angle, of course, where the attackers themselves are now using the AI, for example, artificial intelligence mechanisms, where if they realize, for example, if they launch an attack and it's detected through different mechanisms, whatever in AI, machine learning models, they're also able to also use them because there are available technologies to everybody. So those, to me, are the angle or the threat we're going to see, where the attackers are also going to get smarter. And the CISO themselves now have to be well prepared to be able to sleep well at night. Don't just pick next technology that comes, that is going to prevent, to protect your critical infrastructure. So you have to be able to assess all these threats that are coming out, both in the cloud, both insider threat, and as well with regards to credential theft as well. Back to you.
Thank you, Gilbert. I'd like to bring in Osama into the conversation and get your thoughts on other emerging trends, such like IoT and OT and 5G, because with with these upcoming technologies or emerging technologies, as the world calls it, we are looking at an increased attack surface, and opening all these organizations vulnerable to other kind of threats which are uh, coming through all these emerging technologies. So, Osama, what's your perspective on emerging threats as it pertains to operational technologies, IoT, and 5G?
Just a point about the previous subject of discussion, if you allow me, Farooq. One of the challenges I've been seeing here in Egypt, at least, and probably it exists in other African countries as well, for adopting the cloud from a security perspective, is the position of the regulators in the country. In Egypt, for example, most of the regulators, like the Egyptian Central Bank in the banking sector, or the Egyptian Petroleum Authority, they are not in favor of going to the cloud. And the main reason behind this is that they do not like the idea that the data is stored out of the legal jurisdiction of the Egyptian state. So it's not a matter of cybersecurity, it's a matter of legality. And one of the things we really need all to think about, because I believe many of the African countries, regulators in all of the domains, telecom domain, banking domain, they will have a similar problem. And for the third parties, for the vendors of cloud technology, this probably means they need to have they need to have some nodes in Africa to mitigate this kind of problem. And at the end of the day, this is it will come down to, and it will come down to as well having the proper infrastructure if we really need to have some proper cloud hosting within Africa, which, by the way, we do have. I mean, when I see the map for fiber optic cables taking the round of Africa, there is there is a lot of fiber infrastructure in Africa, data centers as well. Now back to the point you have just mentioned, the IoT landscape change and its effect on cybersecurity. This is one of the things that banks have been historically suffering from. I believe the IoT, the Internet of Things, is part of a bigger landscape. I call it operational technology. Internet of Things falls under operational technology. We usually use the term operational technology for everything that is not information technology. I mean, that's, if it's not IT, then it's OT. It's as simple as that. So industrial control system, Internet of Things, all of these systems that are becoming increasingly IP-based and connected, they are entering the landscape of cybersecurity, and they are becoming a challenge for CISOs as well. Most of the banking CISOs now, they have to consider the security of the ATM machines, and they have to think of what if someone disconnected the cable from the router to the ATM machine and plugged it into his own laptop and started to enter our bank network as an ATM machine, and he's an attacker, and that machine is in the street. I mean, anyone can do that. CISOs in the banking sector, they started to think of this like 6 or 7 years ago. It's not new to them. The problems that are caused by adopting operational technology are now becoming a pain in the back of cybersecurity people. This is even increasing now, especially in the energy industry and manufacturing industry as well, because most of the industrial control system nowadays are IP-based and are Windows-based as well, like the famous SCADA that was hacked in Stuxnet, very well-known attack. So the conclusion of this, yes, operational technology is now part of what CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers around the globe, needs to take care of, each in their own industry. And by the way, I think the main differentiator right now between CISOs is this. I mean, if you are a banking CISO, you are very acquainted with the multiple operational technologies used in banking, which are completely different from energy and manufacturing sector, completely different from other sectors. So that's what differentiates you as a banking CISO. Not the IT systems, because the IT systems are basically all the same in all the industries, but the OT systems are different. And the OT landscape, that's the new pain, is increasing and is very, very, very not secure. Farooq, you've probably heard of the Dyn DNS service provider outage. It happened in 2019. And Dyn is DYN is a DNS service provider. And its outage actually caused service problems for many giants like Netflix and Google. And the outage was really a problem. It happened in 2019. That outage was because of a DOS attack on the DNS service provider called DYN. And one of the very notable things in this attack that there was a significant part of the DDoS attack by IoT devices. And one of the jokes, it's not a joke, it's a fact about that attack, that one of the, when the DYN security people were reviewing the logs, they discovered that one of the devices that attacked them is a toaster. So the toaster got hacked, and they were attacked using a toasting machine that is connected to the internet. And they observed many, especially, and this is one of the biggest problems now a country like Egypt is facing. They have seen that many of the significant chunk of the traffic generated for this attack was coming from webcams, internet cameras. And why this is becoming a problem for countries like Egypt and even countries outside Africa, like United Arab Emirates, and inside Africa as well, because there is a significant trend in Africa for building smart cities. And smart cities are equipped not just with cameras, but many connected sensors around the city for traffic, for irrigation, for many things. And all these sensors are poorly equipped from a security point of view. Cameras, for example, they come to you with the username admin and the password admin. And the bad news is you can't change the password. The manufacturer of the camera did not think that you will need to change the password. And so all those cameras can be hacked. They can all be used in an orchestrated DDoS attack. And tools like Mirai, for example, which is used to orchestrate attacks, can very, very easily scan for webcams that are from a specific vendor or a specific model that are known to be difficult to change their administration password, include them in their botnet, and sell this capability for anyone who wants to perform a DDoS attack. So I think one of the major things CISOs need to consider, whatever the discipline is. I mean, you're a CISO of a developer building a smart city, or a bank that is not just buying ATMs, but as well buying IP cameras for its own physical security. You really need to consider the quality of the technology you are buying when it comes to IoT devices. One of the because the basic problem right now with the IoT devices is not that they are not just not secure, but they are not as well, how would I say this? They are not corrigible. If you have an administrator account that has admin as password and you cannot change it, probably you should have not bought that camera in the first place. Yeah. So CISOs really need to consider the quality of the equipment they are buying, and they need to apply really the very basic concepts. Can I change the password of that device? Is that device using an operating system that is well known, like Linux, for example, or something that is really built for that device, which decreases for us the exposure and decreases the risk.
No, good. Osama, let's just say you opened a can of worms and you started talking about SCADA and risks related to OT. And I think we could probably do a session on OT related threats, because I mean it's a long list of things, and just a few things that I wanted to just pick on, as you mentioned. Uh, OT is a clear and present danger for organization, and it has often become a backdoor for many organizations. I'm not sure, but I think I'm sure you guys would have heard about the famous fish tank attack which happened in Las Vegas. And before the fish tank attack happened, Las Vegas was known as one of the most cyber secure places in the world. And it took one thermostat controller to get into into that network and get access to customer credentials. So it's so alarming. The fact that you spoke about threats to SCADA, you spoke about Stuxnet, things like those are not just putting organizations at risk, but it's putting critical infrastructure at risk also. So really important things. And thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on it. I mean, this is one of my favorite subjects, so we could just go and spend more time on this. But I'd like to take the conversation a bit forward, and let's just say like to address the elephant in the room, and which is the current pandemic. And we are like almost 8 months into the current pandemic. There are various countries of the world which are experiencing the second wave of the pandemic. Some people call it the new normal. Some people call it the new abnormal. But I would like to pose a question to Ahmed Nabil in terms of what are the current security threats? How do you see that evolving, and how do we look at these threats evolving after the pandemic? So, Ahmed Nabil, if you can share your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Farooq. Just one comment. I'll just take it pick on what Osama mentioned about what we're having in the Middle East and Egypt and a lot of African countries, sorry, because it's really important. So yes, we have the regulations, and sometimes they are mandating maybe no cloud, or at least use cloud providers that are available locally. And then another challenge on this is that traditionally you will not be able to find that all the top tier providers that you want in your country. So this is another challenge. You will be obliged sometimes to go to a different provider than the one maybe used to work for a long time, which will requires a lot of adaptation as well in your process. So this is one of the major challenges as well, because now the footprint of all the major cloud providers, which let's assume there are 2 or 3 major cloud providers, is not available in all countries locally. So this will not be able to support the regulatory concerns. When it comes to the pandemic, we need to understand that there are different challenges. Of course, there's a lot of security challenges, very clear, which is regarding the remote work and the VPNs and the type of work and the phishing, all those kind of things that we can go through it. But one thing that I always try to focus on is the new culture. So for us, security professionals, the pandemic has created some challenges beyond our concerns. For example, the emotional impact of the pandemic has led in some cases to a lot of distraction and disorientations. And when this happens, people become susceptible to attacks. People tend to be a little bit careless towards some minor things. And this was one of the major things due to the pandemic. Also, when the pandemic happened and people were rushing to the cloud, people were not ready for these transformations. This cleared what's called the shadow IT, because with the democratization of the cloud, this enabled a lot of departments, a lot of organizations to provision cloud services for storage, communication, application, development, think of it, and among other things, without going to the respective teams, without going to the without going to the security and getting the approvals. So this is one of also the major challenges I see with upcoming behind the technical things that we can discuss.
Thank you, Ahmed Nabil. Like Osama, to weigh in on the current security threats during the pandemic, and how do you see all that evolving?
From my perspective, I consider the pandemic, as you described it, Farooq, it's the new normal, not the new abnormal. Planet Earth is becoming increasingly crowded. The human race, the Homo sapiens I talked about in my presentation, used to be something around 20 million. Now they are about 7 billion. So crowded is what marks the age we are living in terms of humans. And this is definitely going to cause more pandemics. So I'm not sure COVID-19 first and second wave are the last thing we will see in this context, which means for us in cybersecurity that remote access is going to be the new normal. Many firms in the United States, in particular, they had this paradigm shift. Why do we have headquarters consuming energy and furniture, and why we are spending all this money? Maybe the right thing in the IT industry in specific. I'm not saying that banking will do this. I mean, at the end of the day, banks need to have headquarters, branches, and stuff like that. But IT companies like Google and Apple and even IBM and these companies, Microsoft, they started to think why we have these headquarters, why we have these offices. Maybe we should remain forever working from home. So for us in cybersecurity, we will see a surge in remote access with all the associated threats with remote access. So remote access is nothing new to the cybersecurity people. It's volumetric size that it's going to be a challenge, but the threats associated with it are nothing new to the cybersecurity folks. On the other hand, one thing that is going definitely to increase with the pandemic mode that humanity will be living in, I believe in, because it's the new normal in the future. It's the point highlighted by Ahmed right now. The attack on information. We are all the time in need to know what to do. We've learned a lot from the first wave of COVID-19, but when the second wave happened, it's as if we know nothing about COVID-19. And people are continuously trying to get as much information as they can. And in this context, attacks happen. Because yes, we have an appetite for information, we are looking for it, and there is really no source of information you can trust all the time. So whatever information you are getting on WhatsApp, by email, anyone registering a domain, call it COVID-19, blah, 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 dot anything, and sending you phishing links, you will be definitely clicking those links, clicking them in WhatsApp, clicking them in instant messaging, all social media, and you will be falling in the trap. So we will definitely witness a surge, an increase in this, and it's already happening. There is one of security firm that actually published a statistic about how many domain names, phishing domain names, are registered on a daily basis during the COVID-19 crisis. They exceeded 4,000 on a daily basis. All of these are phishing domains registered on a daily basis. Imagine this during the whole pandemic period. We will definitely see an increase in this. And I'll get you back to the point of cyber deterrence. We really need to know who is behind this and put an end to it.
No, thank you.
I would comment also. Sorry. I would just reiterate again. In the UK, for example, the National Cybersecurity Center detected more UK government-branded scam relating to COVID-19 other than any subject since the outbreak in March. So as Osama mentioned, there's coming new attack vectors. So if you are saying that there's the new normal of working, which is remote and the cloud, so I think we need to understand also that phishing and hacking attacks are set to become the new norm.
Yeah, for sure.
The COVID-19 infection rate results. These are the new norm. It's the most easier entry point for them. Remote workers will be using a lot of VPN technologies, a lot of remote connection technologies, which again lack some adequate safeguards. Then we might hear now about things like the zero trust, focusing more about the identity and how you're going to secure these connectivity in the.
No, thank you. I think, I think we're looking at the fact that we need to have better controls in place as it comes to zero trust or controls like CASB and deterrence like multi-factor authentication, and making sure that people are using things like VPN or DNS tunneling. Anyways, let's switch gears now, and I'd like to bring in Gilbert into the conversation, and let's talk about compliance challenges. I mean, we're living in a day and age where even the compliance or regulatory compliance space is evolving. I mean, European Union came up with GDPR, which has just changed the entire approach toward privacy. And I mean, as a security and compliance professional, I couldn't be happier that EU came up with that, and that has triggered activities across the globe in terms of Canada coming up with a new version of PIPEDA, state of California and the US coming up with some regulations around privacy. South America, especially in Brazil and Argentina, they're coming up with some really strict data protection regime. But let me play the new guy card. I mean, not knowing much about how things prevail in North Africa and other parts of Africa, be it the southern parts of Africa, eastern, western part. Gilbert, how would you weigh in terms of your experience and your future outlook about the current compliance challenges, and how do you see that evolving? And do you see them as just challenges, or are they do you see elements of opportunities also over there?
Thanks so much, Farooq, and thanks to my fellow panelists, for the wonderful contribution. Look, it's interesting when you talk about the issue of compliance and of course data protection. But it's good you've mentioned the EU GDPR, which is as long as you're dealing with European citizens, there's the angle where you need to be able to have that element and protection of the data of the EU citizens. And of course now to bring you back home to Africa, data protection, or rather the data protection laws, is not that it's new in Africa. I mean, if you look at there's 2014 African Union Data Protection Convention that I think was passed in 2014, of course now to be ratified, but also to be passed by the different countries, where we are seeing now the countries like South Africa, there's a good conversation going on there. The POPIA Act, for example. Nigeria, I think, is also having conversation about their data protection. Kenya just passed the Data Protection Act, data protection law. Other countries, I'm sure, of course, there are other countries that might still not have that well, but countries, for example, like Mauritius, I think are doing very, very good work there. Mauritius, and I think based on the ITU cyber index, I think it also was able to show some of the work that these countries are doing. Like, for example, Mauritius, Rwanda, Kenya, with regards to their preparedness. But there's a quite correlation there with regards to countries that were highlighted that are in one way or the other at least have a good cyber security preparedness index, is the fact that at least you see these are countries that have started the conversation and ensure that how do we protect the data of or data flow of their citizens, or whether the case. And now you're seeing different conversations also happening in Africa, where you're talking about the FCTA, for example, with regards to trade. So I see a lot of opportunity in that. Of course, the CISOs are going to have one challenge, is that, for example, imagine you are a CISO who is, let's say, have a company that is multinational, let's say a CISO in Africa, and you have your company is dealing with different territories. Let's say you are dealing with territories in that, for example, citizens, let's say from European Union, you have citizens from different African countries, maybe, that are going to also pass their different laws and acts. The question to you as a CISO is that you will have to be on top of your, on top of your fingers. You need to be able to have a good understanding of what are the requirements and regulations from these countries, so that at least you're able to comply. That is going to be very, very important. That's number one. You need to be able to ensure that at least you are in line with some of the requirements, so that at least also you don't end up maybe having to be fined, or rather to face some, regulation implications. For example, we know EU GDPR, you're talking about at least 4% of your revenue, if I'm not wrong. So you're looking at that, maybe, I'm sure also with regards to implementation, some of these countries are going to have to enforce some measures on how do you, ensure compliance. Because if you look very well, for example, remember Kenya case, it was the Data Analytica, for example, case we are talking about, the Data Analytica, where Facebook was, accused of having allowed access to some of those third-party data of Kenyan citizens, and there are allegations that this information was used during the election to maybe also interfere with our democracy. And when you talk about such things, maybe with time, more African countries might end up now, or the regulators are going to have teeth to be able to maybe enforce some of those laws. And I see, for example, Kenya now, we're talking about data protection officer. I think Kenya now just appointed data protection officer, where you need to be able to report even some of these, I think, cyber incidents to the data protection officer. They will want to know how your data is being protected as an organization. So I think as a CISO rather is that you need to be able to be aware that with these regulations that are coming in, you need to be able to understand the environment, and this all involves in and are covered, for example, in frameworks like ISO 27001, where you need to be able to understand your environment. So those are going to be very, very important, where a CISO has not to be just somebody, and and a CISO role is more of connecting technology. And normally people I think sometimes mistake a CISO as a technical. CISO needs to, apart from maybe having the technical background, understanding technology, but the CISO also need to be able to understand the business risk, to be able to communicate to the top management and the board. So the CISO will occupy a very, very important role. And I see that the modern CISO will have to be on top of his game, on their game, with regards to the data protection acts we're seeing coming across in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gilbert, for sharing your perspective on the whole regulatory space, which is also evolving and trying to keep up with the global regime on data protection. Osama, you have been associated with the banking sector for quite some time, and I'm sure the banking sector is also coming up with regulations around cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection. So, how do you see that the regulatory compliance landscape changing in terms of the financial sector and some other industries in Africa?
I believe that regulators plays a crucial role in cybersecurity. In my opinion, at least what I've seen in Egypt, and I would say it is probably valid for the rest of Africa. The main motive for most of the institutions of taking the security controls to a new level is actually compliance. When usually the risk appetite of even the banking sector, for example, in Egypt, before the Central Bank of Egypt asked clearly in a regulation that all the banks need to have a security operations center. When this was left to the appetite of the organization, we didn't have in most of the banks a security operations center. And I really think that the regulators, I really encourage the regulator to play an even increased role in promoting security controls within their industries. Because this has proven to be, at least in a country like Egypt, that this is the main motivation beyond improving security in most of the institutions. They need to be compliant. The state understands. And it's really important that it's not enough that only the business understands the risk. If the government as well understands the risk, then we can move forward. But if only the enterprise understands the risk and the government doesn't, it's really difficult to move forward. So to me, the regulators are a key driving force beyond improving cybersecurity within enterprise. And I would like to see them actually expanding this role, doing more of it. At least in the North African countries, we've seen lots of change happening in data privacy when the GDPR was issued in Europe. It did reflect on North African countries with branches of companies, of European companies operating in North Africa, and it did improve their security. I tend to from experience, I tend to differentiate still between compliance and security, because there was this, I would say, incorrect idea that the more you are compliant, the more you are secure. I'm not saying that compliance doesn't increase security. Yes, it does. And I actually begged for this 1 minute ago, okay? But what I'm saying is that compliance is not the only mean for security. At some point, just to give you an example, most of the banks were, I think out of strict marketing perspective and to please Visa and MasterCard as well, in order not to incur penalties and charges, they started to be PCI DSS compliant. However, being PCI DSS compliant means means you secured just cards information. What about the rest of the information?
Yeah.
I mean, a bank has way more information about his customers than just the card information. So everyone become PCI DSS compliant. I mean, not everyone, but I mean, many banks were really interested in getting PCI DSS compliant, and they forgot about the rest. I mean, and they invested their security budget in this. While if you had some security controls that secure all your data, not just the card data, that doesn't really amount to what PCI DSS needs, probably you would have raised the bar way more than implementing PCI DSS. So I need us to be a bit balanced when we think of compliance. I need the regulators to enforce more compliance rules, to push organizations to be more secure. And in the same time, we need institutions to understand that they have a job to do in terms of security outside from compliance perspective. That if you don't need someone in 2020 to tell you need to have a SOC. I mean, if you don't have it by now, you don't have security. So the central bank coming out and telling you if you don't have a SOC by now, then I'm telling you have to have it. That's not really the right approach to security. The right approach is you need to consider the risks around your business and listen to the CISO in this context. I'm one of the people who always play the devil advocate when it comes to the CISO role, because I fully believe in what Ahmed said, what Gilbert said a while ago. Definitely everyone reporting to the CISO, to the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, need to talk business. The Chief Risk Officer need to talk business. The Chief Operation Officer need to talk business. It's not only the CISO who need to talk business and understand it. However, I don't think that it is proper in 2020 to have a CEO that doesn't understand cybersecurity. I'm not talking here about understanding the importance of cybersecurity. No, I'm asking the CEOs to understand cybersecurity. I've worked for a bank, and I've noticed while attending the executive committee of the bank that everyone in the C-level understand the laws regulating the banking operations in Egypt. Everyone knows the law by number. It's the law 131 in the year 2009. They actually remember the phrasing of the law. So and at the end of the day, they are all business administration graduates. They are not law graduates, but they know the law because it's the law governing the banking business in Egypt. So why you don't know a bit of cybersecurity? I'm not asking you to be at the same level of the CISO, but at least you need to have a minimum so you can be able to talk to him, because there are things that are technical that you really need to know. So I want this obligation that I need to understand business to be mutual, and the CEO as well need to understand cybersecurity. That's the last thing I'm going to say, Farooq. In a domain like banking, in an area like banking, nowadays more than 90% of the banking transactions are delivered through information technology. ATMs are basically Windows machines. Mobile banking, mobile wallets, internet banking, all of the, even phone banking, all of these are information technology. How come you are a CEO of an institution delivering 90% of its service through information technology, and you have no idea what are the risks around information technology? I'm asking you to have a minimum. So whoever is choosing CEOs nowadays,
Okay.
2020, minimum literacy of cybersecurity, just the same way a CEO, a CISO.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, are you still there? Okay.
Yes, and I finished my talk. I'm sorry.
No worries. Okay, so I'd like to turn it over to Ahmed Nabil. And Ahmed Nabil, you highlighted the risk associated with using the cloud, but I just want to add another twist to that point that you raised. And the twist is more around not just cloud, but third-party service providers as a whole. I mean, most of the third-party service providers which organizations deal with are mostly SaaS providers or cloud service providers, but just the fact that the reliance on third party security providers has increased exponentially. How is that risk, first of all, being handled by organizations? And how can organizations develop a strong governance around it just to manage that whole part?
Thanks, Farooq. So just one comment to take it from Osama, that about the compliance and security, because there's many people are under the mistaken assumption that they have met their compliance requirement, either by going to the cloud or dealing with third party or in country, they're secure because compliance provides good enough security. Unfortunately, this is not true in different cases. And here it's why, because I mean, it's possible to be compliant, but not fully secure, because the word secure is always contextual to an organization and the unique and constantly evolving threat by this organization. So it's most important to understand also that compliance guidance sometimes is just the minimum level of security. And by the minimum level, we're not, I mean, depending again on the business, we might like to add more on top of this as well. So when you think about the third party now stopped being something like an afterthought. It started to become one of the main top security priorities for CISOs and risk departments. If I'm developing a security program, one of the key domains that I will have will be third party risks. We need to identify and assess them. We need to ensure that these third parties are compliant with our own security. And here's some problems. I mean, it's very difficult sometimes to do some kind of on-site checks. It's very difficult sometimes to do a real assessment for these third parties. And sometimes people rely only on just questionnaires, a normal questionnaire sent to a third party to fill it, and that's it. And this is, again, one of the challenges that we need to think about. We need to think about something that can be automating this thing, periodically doing some kind of automation to assess these third-party risks for our third-party vendors. We need to think about the previous vendors. So now we're starting a new program. So most probably we'll enroll the new companies. What about the previous companies or the other companies that have been working with us in a kind of third party? What will be their third party? How are we going to manage these third party thing? And then when you think about the cloud and the problem with the cloud, and one of the major challenges when it happens with third party, that sometimes, especially if you're a normal organization, even a big organization, you're not able to assess the risks in the cloud. These big, gigantic cloud providers, Amazon or Microsoft, they will just give you some kind of report, SOC reports or whatever reports, and that's it from them. But for you to go and do the assessment and check on site and check the data centers, this will be a really, really difficult thing. So you need to understand what we can do here, because it will, I mean, we are losing our ability to negotiate a contract with them. There's the term of service. Here in the term of services they dictate some kind of security roles and responsibilities. And again, back to what Gilbert mentioned about the shared responsibility. So regardless of the third party, regardless of the provider, if I'm sharing my data, for example, I need to take the appropriate measures and controls to ensure that my data is protected, encrypted, whether in transit, storage, and whatever means. So these are kind of challenges that we are dealing with third-party assessments, for example. For you, Farooq.
Thank you, Ahmed Nabil. Gilbert, how would you weigh in on this? I mean, managing the risks around third-party service providers and having a strong governance around that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's quite clear. I mean, this is a conversation that is there all along, and is a challenge. Third-party risk is a huge challenge because, can you imagine, for example, being compromised from your, when an attacker, access, for example, your from your cloud provider perspective? Who takes the blame? That's the point now. The CISO is like, okay, fine, we went to the cloud, but who exactly is going to take the blame here? So I think this is going to be very, very important. Before even we think of cloud, third-party risk management is very, very important. Whatever level of access we're giving, do we need? And that's where now clear risk assessment needs to be done. Risk assessment, we be able to have a clear risk mapping. What exactly is also our risk acceptance criteria? What are our risk appetite? So we need to be able to understand what are the risks in the organization, what exactly are the controls that we have put in place. And I love the fact that the Osama and Ahmed have even emphasized it, that compliance is not security. Compliance is just the minimum framework. I mean, you've seen organizations ISO 27000 certified, but they end up getting compromised without mentioning names. I mean, you've heard these big vendors come in and certify an organization, and next you hear is they are compromised. So it tells you a lot that that's always my problem in security. Is that it's always vendor driven, but sometimes you end up it's always about pushing products, pushing this, but it doesn't solve the security itself. And if and that's where the conversation in the industry has to come. And it's good we're having such platforms which are not vendor driven in one way or the other, so that we know that there's a challenge, and we need to be able to have solutions and right control. I mean, I've seen organizations achieve quite full security without being ISO 27001 compliant, and I've seen even organizations deploy the use of open source technologies without having to invest in huge, gigantic budget, and they be secure. So there are different frameworks and different tools that you can be able to use. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. For example, if you run, for example, an Nmap scan on your network or maybe OpenVAS, you're really having a clear understanding of your vulnerabilities. It's a fact, without having to invest in a bigger, vulnerability management or assessment tool. I mean, that doesn't require huge investment, to be honest. So I think we need to understand that, security and compliance are two different things, and we have to ensure that part of third-party security risk is quite well assessed, and that becomes a huge problem and a need focus for the CISO. With that, I close my remark. Back to you, Ahmed. Back to you, Farooq.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Gilbert. We are at the tail end of a conversation. I would like to hear some parting remarks from everybody. And my question to everybody is that how do you future-proof the CISO of today? How do you make sure that CISO of today is well equipped to respond to the challenges of tomorrow? So just one key recommendation from everybody, just being cognizant of time. So I'd like to start off with Osama.
My only recommendation is for the CISO to focus on the operational technology of his industry.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Ahmed Nabil, how about you? What would your recommendation be for CISOs? Ahmed, you there?
So my own recommendations to CISO level is business focused. I think this has been discussed. Yeah, we need to be more business focused. If our business, the threats, you'll be able to protect your business. You'll be able to understand the goals and the objectives of the business and align yourself. We are a business enabler. We're not just a cost center anymore.
Amazing. Rightly said. Couldn't agree more with that. Okay, Gilbert, what's your one recommendation to the CISOs?
Mine is very simple. Be better communicators. I think CISOs need to be better communicators of risk to the business. I think that's one thing that CISO needs to be. They need to be better communicators of risk to business and to their board of directors or board. They need to be better communication. And of course, last one, continuous improvement. They need to learn every single day. Thank you.
Amazing. I think there's lots to take away from our discussion today in terms of building better communication, having a more business-focused approach, making sure that you are continuously improving yourself, and making sure that you are adept to the changes in terms of the business, the regulatory environment. And my favorite one is evolving as fast as the threat landscape is evolving, because the cyber threat landscape is evolving every day. That's what I tell everybody. People don't believe me, but that's what's happening right now. Every morning when I wake up, there's some new threat over out there. But on this thought, I would like to thank all our panelists for today, Ahmed, Nabil, Gilbert, and Osama. Thanks a lot for joining the conversation. Learned a lot from this conversation and really interactive conversation. So thanks a lot for joining the conversation. And we should be pausing for a bit debrief before we end, but thanks a lot.
Thank you.